here's what we got. Someone has to take away my Facebook Marketplace privileges, or I'll keep bringing stuff home like this. It's a 1940 John Deere H. Engine seized. It's pretty rough. It's all loaded up. Got some wheel weights too. New tires. Hood. That's okay. Gas tank. Some B parts. We just made it back home, and we were looking at it, and it looks like we brought some mice home as well. And the fuel tank's full of mouse nest, so good thing we have another fuel tank. Thank you, Francisco, for the croil. I'm going to start soaking things that have to come off. And we used the endoscope to look in the spark plug holes, and it's full of rust. The motor is completely seized, which the guy said it was in the listing. We were hoping that it wouldn't be bad and we wouldn't have to take off the head, but we're gonna have to take off the head. And I'm hoping we could just hone it out, clean it up a little, hone it out, knock the pistons out, put new rings on, throw it back together. But I don't have high hopes. Here's the tank that we got with it. No holes in it that we see. The guy said it was a good tank, so we believe him. And here's the wheel weights. We got these separate from the tractor, from the same guy though. They're definitely at least 100 pounds each. For now though, a couple things I know that I need are tubes, because I have the 4 tires, but I need 4 tubes. Magneto, the guy did not have the Magneto. I forgot to ask about that when I was messaging him on Facebook. He didn't have it when I asked in person. And the breather. I have the valve cover, but the breather that comes from about here to up here, I need. And obviously I'm gonna need spark plug cables, not much left of these old ones. Here's the serial number. Finally working on the John Deere H. Now that school started up, don't have much time to work on these things. First thing we have to do is take off the hood, and in order to do that, you have to take out the steering shaft. I got the nut off. Now I'm going to use the puller to try and take the wheel off. Well, it's been soaking with croil for a while, but it's going to need some heat. There it goes. Got it to pop off. I'll just tap it the rest of the way off. And don't lose the key. Now break the 2 bolts loose up here. Let's see what's hiding in here. Just some disgusting old grease. Now spin the shaft clockwise. Steering shaft is out. Put the cover back on. Now I'm going to use my adjustable wrench / screwdriver to remove these screws. The backing nuts have all broken free, so they're just hanging around. The bolts are all removed. Tried not to get in too much. And the dash can slide forward now. Next are these 2 gas tank mount bolts. Alright, everything's removed now. Hood just has to come off. There we go. The hood's off. And you can see there's nothing left of the gas tank. And also, the tank mount bracket is cracked just about all the way through. It's missing all the muffler bolts for some reason. I had to cut the shutters here to get them off, but these shutters are junk. I have a new set. A new used set. Now that the hood's off, I can put a rubber glove and zip tie to protect the steering box, which I will fill with degreaser / water. Be sure to cover the exhaust again. Now I just made this little stand. I made it out of these engineered boards, 2x6s, and then I put diagonal so it doesn't tilt to the side. This front of the tractor's not very heavy, and it won't be up for too long. We already have the tires for those wheels. Just have to get the old tires off, paint the rims, paint up here, throw them back on. We'll be good to go. Shouldn't take more than a month. There we go. Lift it up off the ground. Plenty of space to get new wheels on. And it's plenty safe. I wouldn't go under it, but it's not going to fall down. Now that the front of the H is lifted up, we can take off the front tire. But there are no lug nuts or lug bolts. So let's just start taking things apart. As you can see, you're going to have to take off the axle nut, which is this part, but you're probably going to want to get some gloves on. Got gloves on now. Take out the bolt that was going through here and the cotter pin. Then the axle nut just spins right off. Now the whole wheel slides off, so make sure you catch the bearings, don't want it going in the dirt. Now for the other side. There we go, the other side's off. Now I'll get a little bit of screwdriver action. This screwdriver's already broken. Clean it up a little. Now we got one tire off. Inside of the rim looks pretty good. Have to clean it and paint it. So we cut this one, help get it off because it's so stiff. This one we cut, but it's just kind of falling apart anyway. It's a lot easier when the tires have fallen apart. Could probably reuse that too. This tire probably had another couple thousand hours on it. Add these to the collection of junk tires. Soon we're gonna have to make a tire run. We'll fill the truck up with old tires and throw them off the side of the highway somewhere. Working on the John Deere H again, and today we're just taking stuff off. We'll start with the exhaust pipe, just 2 bolts there. These bolts weren't too rusty, but the coil definitely helped free them up. It's off. There's plenty of rust. That's what came out of it. I got the toolbox out. Now we'll move on to the fan shaft. There's 2 bolts underneath here, and then 3 here by the governor. Bolts are out. Now give it a tap. Should pull out. Don't slam it into the radiator though. Now we can inspect in the governor housing, and somehow there's mouse nest in the engine. Now let's pull off the crankcase cover and see how bad it is. Not too bad. Looks like the mouse nest stayed up here mostly. Now I'm trying to take the the shutters off the radiator. And thank you to the person who sent me this air hammer, because I don't think I would have been able to turn that with the pliers if I hadn't jostled it with this. That thing's really nice, and Ingersoll Rand is a really good brand. On this one I just hit it with the air hammer in the bottom there and got it to turn. Coming right off now. Well, I thought we were gonna go 3 for 3, but this one broke off. One more. This one broke off. I'll just have to weld nuts onto those that broke. Fan shroud's off. I just cut all the bolts because they go through and have nuts on them. And I have a new fan shroud. This one's pretty rusty. I'll save this one though. Next up is the fan bracket. Just 2 nuts and carriage bolts. Now we can lift this right off. Now we can play how many manifold studs are we gonna break. One of them came out. The M12 stubby took this one out. Looks like this one broke loose too. I think these are normally 3/4, but they identify as 11/16 now. And there's number 3. Looks like this one can't decide if it's 3/4 or 11/16. Must be metric. Well, I didn't have an 18mm wrench or shallow socket, so I used one of these rounded bolt nut extractor sets. Thank you to the person who sent these. They might not be the most used tool, but when you use them, it's such a lifesaver. All 4 of the manifold nuts / studs came off. I should probably go buy a lottery ticket since I'm on a roll. In the next part, I'll be trying to get the head off. Continuing work on the John Deere 8, I took the rockers off the head. You just have to take these 2 nuts off and then slide the rocker shaft out. And the rockers just fall out. And all of the valves are stuck right now. But before we take the head off, let's get this upper radiator pipe out of the way. Pull off the 2 old hose clamps. I'm going to need to get new hose clamps because the screws are all rusty. And new hose. Full of rust. Inside the cylinder don't look too bad. And rust inside the radiator, or as much as you can see. Inside the radiator doesn't look too bad. Expected. A little bit of rust. I'm going to be reusing most of the hardware. Replacing all of the lock washers though. Now the lower radiator pipe. I loosened up most of these hose clamps. I think I can reuse these hoses. I got the nuts off of the head. Here's the last one. There's one big one that goes over this stud, which has an oil passage through it. The big one's inch and a quarter, the rest are 15/16. Here comes the acetone ATF we had in there, in the cylinders. We can get our first peek, and it does not look good. Maybe I should stop buying tractors that don't turn over. I know I'm gonna need at least one new valve, but I might be looking at getting a parts tractor. I've just been drenching everything in PB Blaster. We won't know how bad the cylinders are until I get all the debris out of there and wire brush them. I also sprayed penetrant in through the back. Pop this governor cover off and maybe get some mouse nest out of there. Well, I'm not sure how this comes out. Because it just spins. Yeah, this just spins out, but the governor shaft is in the way. And I don't really feel like messing with the governor. I'll probably just get a new bearing for in here, if I can find one. Same with the front wheel bearings. I've got a lot of work to do on this tractor. Just how much power does the M12 stubby have? These are lug bolts on my John Deere H. This tractor has been sitting at least 20 years, probably over 25. Got a 7/8 chrome socket, 3 bars on the battery, and power level 3. These have been soaking with penetrant for about a week. I'm actually impressed. Is the wheel gonna come off? Now for the other side. You know what? This might not be a fair test. The last guy put anti-seize on these. Thank you to the last guy. There are currently no bolts holding this wheel on. Oh, there it goes. It's going to be a lot easier to paint the inside of this rim and get these spots painted with the wheel off the tractor. I mean, the rim. We're missing one bolt, but the other side also had anti-seize. The one with the tire is a lot heavier, of course. Now, how are we going to break the bead on this? trick is to get it as close as possible without touching the rim. There it goes. Popped off. The other side pops right off too. You just kind of stand on it to get the rest. I got the tire off by myself. That took a while. I don't know how you tire guys do it. I rolled it back there with the other tire. It's a bigger one. Now I'm going to start wire brushing the rim. And I got this rim all cleaned up. This hub, I guess you could call it. And the other hub. So a couple people asked to see if the M12 stubby will take off these collar bolts on the John Deere H. We have 4 bars of battery, power level 3, 3/8 drive, 7/8 socket. I don't have any 7/8 impact sockets, that's why I'm using chrome. Yeah, there's definitely anti-seize on these. I ain't complaining that the guy put anti-seize on it though. Then you take the bolt, move it over. Actually, first I'm going to clean some of the bolts up with a wire brush. That's better. It also helps to clean out the inside of the holes. Add some lubrication. Thread them in, and they press against the hub to get this collar to slide off. And it comes right. And there was definitely anti-seize on there. Repeat on the other side. Then give the hub some love taps. And when you're restoring a tractor, it's good to prime everything at the same time. So you don't have 1 coat of primer on one thing, 1 coat of paint on something else, 2 coats of paint on something else. And we want to be able to prime the whole inside of the frame. So to do that, let's pull this radiator off. It's just held on by these 2 bolts. The frame doesn't look too bad, except for these bolts that are probably had a mouse nest sitting in there for quite a few years. And the bottom of the radiator looks fine, except this bar that holds the top on is basically almost gone. Good thing these are all bolts and nuts, so I can just cut these off, or they'll probably just fall off. Get a new bracket, and then just get 8 new bolts and nuts for this side and the other side. Now let's see what's hiding behind the clutch cover. It just pops right off with a chisel and hammer. It doesn't look too bad in there. So this is a hand clutch. All the John Deere 2-cylinders did. So engaged, push the clutch forward. Doesn't spin. Disengaged. Does spin. And then the flywheel brake, or clutch brake, makes it so it won't spin. And then when you put it in gear, the wheel spins. The axle spins. Generally, a good rule of thumb is to not mess with governors on engines. And I tried to not mess with this one on my John Deere H, but it's full of mouse nest in there, and these gears are pretty messed up. So I think I can take those 2 flathead screws off, and then the governor will just slide right up. First, I'll take out the cotter pin to remove the throttle linkage. So I don't want to screw up the timing, so I just put a mark there, and this timing gear is not going to move, this lower gear, because the engine's stuck. Well, it's out. If you don't have one of these tools, you should go get it. It's perfect for grabbing the head of screws and bolts, and you can thread them in, get them started, if you can't reach it with your hand. So, for some reason, this governor bolt gear is pretty messed up, but the rest of the governor looks fine. Luckily, I was able to get the other screw as well. Now let's get this mouse nest out of there. Just removed all the bolts holding on this governor housing. Figure I'll just take it off. Alright, the governor housing is off. And yeah, there's definitely a lot of junk down there. Alright, I got the governor housing and this cover cleaned up and just sprayed on primer just for now. And I sprayed this area that's hard to get when the cover's on. Now I'm going to work on cleaning up the gear. We're slowly but surely making progress. I got the knuckle up there primed. Unfortunately, the more I wire brush the cylinders, the worse they seem to look. Motor's still locked up. But about every couple hours we've been spraying some liquid wrench in. we want to get the front wheels on so we can get it off the jack stands. The wood, so we can paint under the frame. Then we have to get the drawbar off and the mount that it goes on. Put the jack stands under there instead of under the axles, so we can pull the axles off because the brake drums are behind here. And this axle does not spin, and the brake lever does not move. This brake lever does move, and the axle spins. So we have to decide whether we're going to take off this one as well, or just leave it, because it's going to be a lot of work. So this is the valve spring compressor on a budget. This is the John Deere B head, and for this one, to compress the valves, I put all new valves in here, and valve springs, and to compress the valve springs to get the keepers on, I just had a piece of unistrut where the hole fits over the valve up here, and then I can just press it down, have a piece of ready rod, and it's like a lever. Obviously, on this one, that wouldn't work because the head sticks up where the valve cover goes. So now, this is how we're going to do it. Just get your dad and tell him to push down on it.
It's not gonna move.
Or it just flies apart. So I guess that works. Put on your safety squints. You don't want valve keepers going in your eye. We have to find the other one now. There, I found it. So far, one valve broke off, and this is the valve spring that was on there, and you can see it's bent. We're gonna need to do a new valve spring there. This is another valve we took out. This valve is pretty much junk. But this valve spring is a little bit bent, so we might just get 2 new used ones. These 2 valve springs are fine. And these valves on the inside are the intake valves. And this valve is pretty rusted. Where it seats might not be the worst, but we've got a new one. And the other one, this seat is pretty bad. Not usable. And the valve seats on the head are pretty rough. I'll see if I can clean them up. I've got this valve seat cutter kit, but I don't know if it'll work. If it cleans it up good, we'll just have to see. Here's the kit that I have. Got it on like Amazon. Unfortunately, the 5/16 is too small for the Pilot, and 7/16 is too big. Look at all that gunk built up. Get one of these picks from your dentist. Just ask them if they have any. That's how I got this one. And this valve is still stuck. We hit it with the air hammer, and the valve guide is starting to come out. Well, the valve is out, or what's left of the valve, but not as much luck on the valve seat. The valve guide. Just kind of broke. Now we have to figure out how to push it the rest of the way. There we go. This air hammer is like one of the tools you never knew you needed. Got it out. Using a bolt so that we can press on the sides and not spread it out. Here's the difference between a cheap bolt, just went right through, and a grade 8. Now I'm gonna need a new one. Some people say the one advantage of the John Deere 2 cylinders is that when the engine is seized and you can't get it unseized, you can just take off the rod caps and then pull the cylinder out with the pistons in it. That way you can just put the cylinder upright and use either a press to get it out or hit it with wood or something. And when it's upright, you can let some fluid soak in the pistons. So that's what we're gonna do right now. I was able to get this rod bolt loose and then this cap off, but I can't get the one on the bottom here. So let's get the cylinder slid out. It's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inch and a 16th nuts, and 1. Maybe not. Anyway, 1, 2, 3, 4, 13/16 bolts. Alright, all the hardware is removed. Let's pull the cylinder off. Don't forget to take off this oil line down here. There we go, I got it to come loose using some more pry bars and stuff. But this rod doesn't want to, oh, there it goes. It's really stiff. Well, after about 10 minutes, finally got the cotter pin off that bottom one. Didn't even have to cut it. So we just kept turning the flywheel, and then it just pushed the block out like that. And then we could get this ratchet on here with a pipe. We could be the first people in here taking this out since it was built in 1940, but the rods have marks on them. I don't know if they did that from the factory or someone else may have been in here. Now we can use the engine hoist to take the cylinder off. Perfect. This is another reason why it's good to take out the cylinder. All this dirt and stuff traps moisture. Yeah, maybe. It traps moisture, which could corrode through the block. Here's the acetone. We don't have any ATFs, so we're just going to use this 520. This shaft is shimmed so that this bearing at the end has the right clearance. So make sure you get all the shims out, and you have to separate them apart, otherwise it'll leak between the shims. Got all the big stuff out. The rest will come out when we fill it with diesel and drive it around when it's running. Alright, I'll come back in a couple hours and retighten those down and this is all done. I think the last thing that has to come apart on this H, aside from the flywheel and the seat bracket, is this axle. So I guess one of the design flaws you could say of these is that the brake is in the axle and the brake is a commonly serviced part. So before we can put the tires back on, the axle has to come off so we can service these brakes, and this brake lever does not move. I finally got one of the 4.0 M12 batteries. A bunch of you guys were saying to do that. Got it for my birthday. All the bolts are out except for these two. I put them in a little so it didn't fall down, and then I broke this one loose. This one doesn't actually hold the axle housing on. It would just easier to break it loose while it's on the tractor. Alright, let's see how heavy it is. Yeah, it's pretty heavy. Nothing I can't handle though. I'll cheat and use the dolly to bring it inside. You can kind of see that the seal in here has been leaking for a while, just a little. Most of this oil is from after I took the axle out. I'll definitely replace this seal anyway. Now, I know what the part number is for this seal, and on eBay, it's about $50 for one. I'm going to try and measure it and see if I can get one on like McMaster-Carr for a little cheaper. So the inner diameter is about 3.275 inches, and the outer diameter is 4.49 something. About 4.4915, but obviously you'd want it a little big so that it has a slight press fit. And the width of our actual felt sealing ring is about 0.35 inches. I'm inside looking at the parts manual, and the outer two pieces are 30 and 29. Here's 30 and 29, and 29 looks like the retainer, 30 is the seal, There's the part numbers. Now over here on the actual axle, we can measure the part where the seal rides. Best measurement I can get with these is 3.2575. So obviously we're going to want the inner diameter on the seal to be a little bit smaller. So I'm on McMaster car. I think this is what I'm going to need. Actually, this isn't going to work. They only go up to 2.5 inches shaft diameter. And here's the part on eBay, 50 bucks. The engine's still stuck on the H. I have one of these hones, and I got it cleaned up pretty good in there. There's some pitting, but there's no rust other than the stuff that's right up next to the piston that would stop it from moving. And this side is, the piston's too far up to use the hone. And on the inside, the cylinders look fine. You can take off this cover and look. All we can really do now is beat on the pistons with a board and try and turn the flywheel. But there's not enough leverage turning the flywheel, so I'm going to put a piece of angle iron, drill 2 holes, bolt it right to those holes. Alright, there we go. Holes drilled, bolts through. Let's see what we can break first. Yeah, it's not moving at all, as expected. So fast forward, like a month later, cylinder's out, it's all taken apart, and these pistons are stuck. We've been soaking with acetone, ATF, and Marvel Mystery Oil. Also, we tried vinegar, and then recently, or yesterday, we flipped the block upside down, wrapped a chain around it, and used a jack, and we ruined this LVL. That's how much pressure we had on it, and that's what the chain was making marks in the board. And we just ended up putting a hole in the piston. We also rattled it with the air hammer a bunch. The bottle jack contacted this stud and bent it and snapped it off, but the other ones we were able to get out. But we were able to get this one piston moving, so we're going to drive it home. We'd basically given up on keeping pistons nice because they're so stuck in here. It pains you to hit the pistons like this, but nothing else you can do, really. Finally, after a month of struggling, the rings are locked up tight, as expected.
I bet it's been stuck for 50 years.
Yeah, it's probably been stuck for 50 years. The bore is not too bad. There's a big ridge down there where it was stuck, though. That's no good. We'll see if we can clean it up, though. I think this one's moving now. Looks like the same story with this bore. Finally, after probably several thousand hits with the hammer and weeks soaking in fluid.
And heat.
Yeah, and a lot of heat. They're out. Yeah, the rings are pretty well stuck in there too. We're obviously going to need another piston. We'll have to see if the bore's clean. Here's a closer up look of the piston that was stuck in the H. I mean, the skirt is pretty rusty. Obviously the rings are stuck, but can't reuse this piston. The other one, the rings are stuck, but it looks pretty fine. I mean, we did beat on it, but we'll have to wire brush it a little more and inspect for cracks, but this one should be reusable. As far as the cylinders, we wire brushed them, and then I ran a hone through it. Not a ball hone, just one of the flat ones. And the areas where the pistons were stuck are pretty much perfect for a tractor. Yeah, those are perfect. This one that was stuck further down is a little more rough. There's some pitting, but it's a low compression engine, and this one, the pitting is all pretty much above where the piston comes up anyway. This one was stuck a tiny bit below top dead center. So here's the piston rings that came with it. They're standard. Nice new old stock. So considering that one of the pistons should be salvageable and we have rings, new rings already, we think we're just gonna put it back together like this. Now moving back to the tractor, let's get this axle seal out. There's a metal retaining ring and then like some felt that functions as the actual seal. I just got this pry bar in here like that. It's coming out. Perfect. Here's the two parts, the seal and retaining ring. So things like seals, bearings, and hardware, you should never buy from the dealer unless it's a really specialty thing. You can generally cross over the part numbers. So these seals were $50 from John Deere, or the John Deere part. I crossed it over to SKF, and I was able to find one for $9 and one for $11 on eBay. So I just bought those. There's the part number, and it's a modern seal, so not the felt. Put a little bit of grease on the inside of the seal to hold the spring in place and just to keep it lubricated. Give it a quick clean out. And I'm not going to be replacing the bearings based on other parts of the tractor. It does not have very many hours, we think. So, and then these are tapered roller bearings, so we can just adjust the preload or backlash. Not sure which one is the right term. I put a little bit of oil around the outside of the seal to help it go in, and then we just tap it in. I just got it started with the hammer, and then put the old seal retainer over to protect the seal when I hit it in. And there it is, looking good. Be sure to not install the seal backwards. The inside of the seal goes towards the side that's retaining fluid. Ooh, everyone loves new old stock parts. These are genuine Timken bearings for my 1941 John Deere H front wheel bearings. First, let's get the tape off of the spindles. Use some Scotch-Brite to get rid of the rust. Now apply a little bit of grease and slide the wheel on. Now fill the inside with grease. Now open up your new old stock bearing. Still wrapped up in the wax paper. Beautiful. There's the number. Now pack the bearing full of grease and slide it on. Tighten it down pretty good to seat the bearings. As you can tell, it's not going to spin freely. Back it off till it spins freely and you get one of the cotter pin holes. Tighten down the locking bolt. Install your cotter pin. Get your hub cover, apply some sealant. I'm using Loctite 515. Now I'm using new bolts and split washers. Now torque the bolts to manufacturer specification. Now I only replaced the outer bearings because I was able to find these for cheap and it's a lot easier to do those. So 2 new tires, new tubes, and outer wheel bearings, and they're adjusted perfectly. And they're Firestones, not good for years. Here's what I'm up to now. This is the axle from the John Deere H, and this is the brake drum. We need to pull the brake drum off of here. We don't have a puller that goes this big, so I'm gonna make one. Just got these 2 pieces of angle iron welded together. Here's all the pieces. Cut slots in there. Looks terrible. It's all set up now. Let's see if it works. New plan. These bolt heads are smaller than these 1/2-inch bolts, so hopefully they fit in there better. The 1/2-inch bolts would just pop out. Well, I don't know. I got the nut there as tight as I can get it before the whole thing starts moving. I must be missing something. Actually, it doesn't look too bad in here. Brake shoes have plenty of meat. Not too rusty either.
It's off here, right?
Oh yeah, it is. And the spring down there's broken too. Easy disassemble brakes. The pads are a little rough and it's broken here, but these will never wear down in the amount of use we'll put on the tractor. At least they won't be worn down in my lifetime. So the pin there and the 2 adjusting pins move, and this adjusting screw moves it as well. Just the pedal does not move, so we're gonna have to drive out the pin and then clean it up. And the drum is a little rough, but it's fine. We can clean that up with the wire brush. A lot of people said to bring the H block to the machine shop, so we decided to bring it to the machine shop, the Redneck machine shop. The first step to using one of these ball hones is to get the cylinders nice and oily. Also put some oil on the hone itself. Then you're going to want to start off slow, and go nice and consistent up and down. Obviously, it's not going to fix that pitting, but this pitting is basically at the top of the cylinder anyway. The rings don't even come up that high. So I just went slow and consistent. Looks good. I have the drill on speed 1. I'm pulling the trigger half to 3/4 of the way. Before I finish that, I just want to explain why we're deciding to not bring the block to the machine shop. The main reason is cost. This is a John Deere B block, and to bore and hone it, it was $280. So I would assume it wouldn't be much cheaper to do the H block, and then also oversized H pistons. It's about $200 more. Now to keep it standard, we're going to need 2 new or used pistons, which are $30 each, and we already have a standard piston ring set, which values at about $120 if you had to buy one. Now for this B, I decided to do the expensive route because I want to bring it to pulls, and I want it to run good and have plenty of power. But the H here, all it will get used for is taken out a couple times a year, driven up and down the driveway just to putt around as a fun little thing. So I'm not looking to get a ton of power out of it. We did, however, have the valve seats cut on the H. This is the H head, and we had 1 new valve seat installed, as well as 1 new valve guide installed. Now let's get back to honing the block. I just honed it out for a little bit more, and I cleaned it up. Now I'm ready to do the final pass. This is arguably the most important pass. This pass, you're trying to get the crosshatch. So you start off and go all the way up and down at about this speed, going up and down because you want to get 45-degree angles in the scratching, and then come out. Well, it's kind of hard to see, but you can see a little bit those crosshatch scratches. Now, I should probably go through and do this again and go up and down a little bit faster to get a little bit of a steeper angle. And these scratches are actually what help. Here's something that not a lot of people do anymore. This is how to reline your brake shoes. This is for a John Deere H. Here's the part number, the lining kit. I got this from Riley Tractor Parts. The kit comes with 4 linings. We only need 2. So the first step is to take the old linings off. Here's one of them. It's not too wore. It's just really oil soaked. The other one fell apart though. Then you want to get all the rust and everything cleaned off the shoe and give it some primer. Now the hardest part of doing this is putting the rivets in. You can do it without one of these tools, but it sure is a lot easier. The whole concept is you put the shoe in like that. The rivet will be sitting like this, so it has a little backstop, and then you hit the top and it peens over the rivet. It can take a couple tries before you find out a good system to get the rivets looking good and holding the lining on tight. There's one. I usually start in the middle, go side to side, and then fill in the extra. There's one. That one's in there pretty tight. Doesn't look the best. You usually get the hang of it after a couple. There's one shoe done. You want to make sure your rivets are seated down so that they're not rubbing on the brake drum. Those rivets look pretty good. I'm not really a fan of how they break apart, but... And there's shoe number 2. So this is the 5th pair of brake linings that I've riveted onto brake shoes. The first couple pairs were a little bit of a challenge, but it probably took me half an hour in total to get the old linings off, clean them up, prime there, get these new ones on and rivet them. So it sure saves a lot of money doing this because these new shoes with linings are really expensive. So here's the old pin that the brake pedal goes on. My dad bent it, beating it out, and this spring was broken. So we got a new used one from vintagetractors.com. We've got a lot of parts from that guy. And there's a spring in there too. And here's the pistons we got for the H, new used. Alright, I got my parts here. Let's start assembling. Alright, the pivot pins in there, the adjusting pins, and the adjusting bolt are all in there, assembled with Silgla. This is a silicone-based brake lubricant. It takes a little, but I got the shoes in there, and it works. Make sure you're trying to put the brake pedal on the right way, otherwise it won't go on. Last piece is the drum. Put some Silglide on these splines. It's a little tricky to get that drum. Now it's time to put the axle with now working brakes back on the John Deere 8. We cleaned up in here a little bit more, and the surface here. I'm just going to use Loctite 515. This isn't holding any fluid in, it's just keeping water and stuff out. Alright, that should be enough. This stuff, when it compresses down, it can seal really thin gaps. Alright, the axle's on. I couldn't video it because it takes two people to finagle the shaft in the differential. And it spins. So I guess that's better than it was before. And it stops too. Of course I have to adjust the brakes. And these bolts get torqued too. Now the question is, do we do the other side? And, you know, it spins. And the brakes actually stop and this adjuster turns, so I think we're just going to not mess with it for now. Now the hubs can go on with some anti-seize. Now is when you want to choose your tread width. I'm just going to go 7.5 to the outside of the axle housing there. It shouldn't be too hard to adjust this. It's a pretty small tractor and the wheels are pretty small, so it's not like a G or a 730. Alright, that collar's on there. Of course, anti-seize as well to save the next guy. Got the rim on. Got all the lug bolts on. Remember, cross thread is always better than Loctite. Alright, in the next couple days here, gonna get this tire mounted. Which, these big tractor tires aren't that hard to mount the tires. It's actually easier than doing like a tiny little lawnmower tire. And that other side. Watch out for flying parts. Sketchy valve spring compressor engaged. It's actually probably cheaper to buy a valve spring compressor than to buy one of these clamps. These clamps are not cheap, but I'll be able to use the clamp for a lot of other projects. This is the head from the John Deere H. Got it back from the machine shop a couple weeks ago. They decked it, cut all the valve seats, installed one new valve seat, and one new valve guide. I just lapped the valves. They were all fine. And I have 2 valves installed, one in the process of installing. All you got to do to install these valves is press the spring down and then get the keepers in there. And then once you get the keepers in there, just back it off. And the spring shouldn't go flying. Looks like we got this one. Make sure the spring in there is seated all the way down in that groove. Of course, these are going in with a little bit of assembly lube. And there's number 4. Now give them all a little bit of a tap, just to make sure they're seated. And they're all good. And here's the new used pistons that are going to go in this engine. They cleaned up fine. I am going to find some new piston pins. You can see a ridge where these are worn. Uh-oh. Professional machinists, close your eyes. Here's the old wrist pin bushings. I decided to install new ones because those ones were a little bit worn. But now, the wrist pin does not fit. Now, these reamers are really expensive, but I got this adjustable one from 1 1/16 to 1 3/16 from Granger for about $50. The way these adjustable reamers work is those blades sit into slots, and the slots are tapered, and the blades are tapered the opposite direction. So the blades stay parallel to the shaft here, but when they move, That way, they move in to be a smaller diameter, and when they move this way, they move out to be a larger diameter. Right now, the inside diameter is about 1.0865 inches, but our pins are about 1.103 inches. I've got my reamer set a little bit small at about 1.109. It's hard to get a good measurement on these. Now I'm just going to insert the reamer, get it as straight as possible, use 2 wrenches 180 degrees apart from each other so that I put even pressure. Now I spun the reamer, and that basically got rid of the burr at the bottom from pressing in the bushings. The pins still don't fit, so I'm going to set my reamer again to be a little bit bigger to make this hole bigger. All you do, spin the nut, spin the other nut. Now I have the reamer set just a little bit bigger, so you can see it's kind of pressing in there. Just going to take off a tiny bit of material. Now I just need a little bit more clearance. The manual calls for between 2 10,000ths and 2 thousandths of an inch. Well, now my problem is the piston pins are worn, so the diameter of it here where it's in between the rod and the piston is bigger than the diameter here and here. I can't find any piston pins, aftermarket or new old stock, but I got the hole reamed out. Perfect fit. Alright, there's the second wrist pin bushing reamed. Now I'm ready to put rings on pistons and put together the rod piston assemblies. Now there are some things you can cheap out on and not go to a machine shop, but putting wrist pin bushings in, rods, and reaming them out is not one of those things. You just can't get the same precision. You ever had one of those times when you're working on something and it just goes so smooth? I barely even had to put force on this. The engine hoist isn't home, so I'm gonna have to get this off myself. Almost there. It's not too heavy. You may be wondering why I did that. It's because we want to paint back here. And we want to paint the inside of the flywheel. And I did check the end play before, but we can do it again. Alright, so we're actually closer to 5 thousandths. But that's perfectly fine. And I also use plastic gauge on the rod bearings, as you can see. Number 1 cylinder was about 17 10,000ths, and number 2 was about 2 thousandths. So we're good there. We're ready to put the block on. Thank you to the person who ordered this dial indicator off my Amazon wish list. People like you help me be more precise in my work and help me make these videos and allow me to afford buying parts for all these tractors. Alright, the block is on now using the same engine hoist, and I put a little bit of high-tack sealant on the gasket. And of course I'm using an RTP gasket set. Alright, that's bolted down to the crankcase, but there's 4 bolts on the bottom that I need. These are the only 1/2-inch bolts I have, and the ones that were in here were square, and I want to replace those with some grade 8s. And then I also have to put the studs in, but I'm going to do that another day. This is the seat to the John Deere H, and I have to take off this nut and bolt so I can slide the seat forwards, and I want to clean up inside there. We should have done this before we painted it, but there's only one coat on, so we'll have to do another coat anyway. And there's not much left of this nut, but I think I have an easy out that can take this off. Perfect. That easy out worked pretty good. Just have to get a new carriage bolt. Now this pin on the bottom is worn out, but there's not really, I could drill that out and put a bushing in or something, but it's fine the way it is. And there is some rust jacking, and I could drill out these 4 rivets, but I'm not even gonna worry about it. The next guy can do that in 60 years. And the clutch pin on this tractor is really good. It mounts here. We're slowly getting closer to being able to start this H. I got the head put on. I just need an 1 1/16 socket to tighten down these nuts that hold in the valve train. Then I can set the valves and put the valve cover on. I'm also waiting for manifold studs. Once I get those, I can put the upper water pipe on, fill it with coolant, see if this radiator holds water, which I think it does. It's finally time to fill the H with coolant. I got all the water pipes on. For some reason, my radiator hose was a little small, but I got it on there. Hopefully we have better luck with this than we did with the B, and there's no hole in the radiator. Now, on these old 2-cylinders that don't have a water pump, it's important to mix your coolant before dumping it in. Like, don't just dump a gallon of concentrate and then a gallon of water, because the properties of the concentrate are different than the water, and it won't heat up and then circulate. It'll just create like a hot spot around the engine, and it won't rise and cool and circulate. It's got about 2 gallons of coolant in it. Let's see if we have any leaks. Doesn't look like it. Our radiator looks good around the bottom of the radiator core. So all of a sudden, a bunch of water pours out. I forgot to put in the water temperature gauge. Well, I was just trying to thread in the water temperature gauge, but the cheap Indian metal, the threads just disappeared. It was only $20 for the 3 gauges. For now, we can just put a plug in it. We're filled up to the top, and there are no leaks. So that's a success. Except I'm still gonna have to get a water temperature gauge, and we're either gonna have to try and swap the gauge and plug quickly without spilling much, or drain down the antifreeze to here. Now we can put the fan shaft on, but first we need to put this mount here. Got new bolts, nuts, split washers. Well, I forgot to video most of putting this fan shaft on, but yeah, I reused the old gasket and just put Loctite 515 because the gasket here has to be a specific thickness because of the angled gears. They have to engage enough, like a differential. Everything's in, no leaks. Next up, carburetor and intake. So I got a new water temperature gauge for the H. Made in India. Looks fine. Now I don't want to drain all the coolant out, so I'm going to try the shop vac trick. The idea is that the vacuum, it pulls a vacuum on the system, and then it'll just suck air through here instead of leaking coolant out. Before we start making a mess, let's see if the gauge fits through the dash. And that looks pretty good. Now let's get a little bit of thread sealant on these. Now let's see if this actually works. It's actually going to be sucking air through here, so I'm going to have to plug that. And it's actually working. I have to finish tightening this down, but that was definitely a success. Now, I learned from the last gauge, be very careful tightening this down because it's easy to strip it out. Looks like we lost a little coolant. Oh, yeah. I kind of expected this. I probably should have emptied this first, so there's not a bunch of garbage in the coolant. I'm gonna have to, run this through, a filter or something, and dispose of the antifreeze properly and put the garbage in the garbage. For now, I'll just Fill it the rest of the way up with 50/50. Now let's get the oil pressure gauge in here. Unfortunately, this fitting does not quite fit on the gauge, so let's just delete this light bulb holder. And that looks pretty good. It's a little annoying that the fonts are different, but it's not. Let's rebuild this Wico X Magneto. Here's the new parts: a coil, a new cap, new rotor, points, stop button, condenser, and a gasket. I also put a new inner bushing and outer bearing in. You don't have to take this metal out of the housing, but I did so that I can clean out in there. Let's start putting it together. First, put the rotor in the housing, then a spacer, then a washer, then the bearing housing. Then take this spacer with the ledge facing down, then put in this plate. Make sure you have the seal in there and you get that line lined up where it was before. Then put this seal cover, then put the trip dogs on, then this spacer, then the cover, then washer, and these two bigger washers with the notch. Then put the spring inside the impulse cup. That was easy. Now you have to get that notch on the spring lined up with that notch. And then once you get the spring on, you want to spin it so you're tightening the spring so that the spring has preload on it. And then you put the nut on. It should not be too difficult to do this. If you're having a hard time getting it lined up, just take it back apart and try again. There should be a pretty good amount of pressure on that. Then it's important to torque this down to the specified value. Probably good. Well, it's back apart, and that's because I had the spring going this direction. It's supposed to be going this direction. Got it back, and now I'll put it back together. Now you can see when you spin it and you get the dogs lined up, it snaps like that. That's when the rotor in here moves fast and then generates electricity, sends it to the coil, and then the spark plug. Now we can install the coil bar through the new coil. Then drop the coil in. This smaller wire coming from the coil just gets grounded right to that clamp. Now we can put the points in. Now put the condenser in, and then this part of the points, the condenser wire and this coil wire all get held into that plastic with a screw. Once you get all that hooked up, and don't forget to put this washer and clip on the top of the points, now we can set the gap. That washer is actually supposed to go underneath the points. Now they line up. We got the points gap set. Now we can put the rotor on and the cap. Now I got the mag on the tractor. Over to a spark plug here. And it's got spark. It just went. It's going to be fun starting this thing by hand. My spark plug end crimper just came in the mail. Nice. Let's test it out on the John Deere H. That worked pretty good. That's the last thing that had to be done before trying to start. I've actually never started a hand crank tractor before, so we'll see how this goes. Got gas. Well, we couldn't get it going by hand. Used the Kubota. Cold started it. Oh, doesn't like to go without the choke. Well, that was the first time we had it running. We learned 3 things. 1, that it has enough compression and it will run. 2, the clutch works. And 3, the seat is way too far forward. My knees are hitting everything. We're still having some Magneto troubles. After it shut off that time, we tried to pull it again and it would just backfire because you see smoke coming out of the intake. Then we saw the Magneto was tilted super far forward because I only have this one bolt in here. We tried again and it still backfired. I'll try. Put the hood on your John Deere H by yourself. Check out this rigging. The engine hoist. I could wait for someone else to do this later, but challenge accepted. Still a couple other things I have to do before the hood can go on. I'm gonna get rid of this old, cheap Indian oil pressure gauge that doesn't work. And finish pulling the steering shaft out. Now we can just slowly lower it down. There it is, about halfway on. Another reason I decided to use the engine hoist was things like this fuel line. I did have it on like that, but that wasn't gonna work. So if we were trying to put this on by hand, we probably would have bent that line. And there it is. Now that the hood is officially on, we can see just how dented it is. Oh well, we can do a little bit more Bondo and then final coat of paint, and it's gonna have to be what it is. So it's currently 7:30 p.m. and we have to leave for a tractor pull around 7:30 a.m. So let's get ready. So right now the plan is to try and take the Oliver 70 and John Deere H, because the Oliver 70 has wheelie bars for it. The H does not, but I think the ones from the John Deere B might bolt up, or we might be able to use them with minimal modification. It's the next morning. We got the H loaded up. Also got the holes drilled in the wheelie bars, or cut with the torch. Now let's see if we can fit the Oliver. It's like it was made to be. Fits perfect. We can even put the ramps up. All right. This data fix John Deere H that has low oil pressure. First thing you should do is check the oil. You do that right here behind the flywheel. Just loosen this, and a little bit of oil should come out of there, just like that. Now come to the other side of the tractor, and right under the clutch is this plug. Then what you're looking for is that screw head right there. That is for the bypass for the oil pump. Just reach your flathead in there, turn it a couple flats, and your oil pressure should be higher. Now let's start it up. There it goes. On idle, it's still a little bit low, but I know how we can help that. These things really do not need that much oil pressure to work. Now it's a little above stop, where before it was about halfway between stop and zero. Now I want to do one more thing to this tractor, and that's adjust the brakes. You see how much play is in that. So there's the adjuster. Watch out for spinning parts. There, you just turn it in, and now there's 2 or 3 inches of free play, which is perfect. Now I'm just going to check the tire pressures, and it should be ready to go for Goshen tomorrow. I'd say about half the time it starts up with a first or second pull, and the other half of the time it takes a couple minutes. Thanks for watching this video if you made it this far, and there are still a few things to do to this tractor yet. The final coat of paint, and I need to mess around with the fuel system a little bit. I'm going to put an inline fuel filter because the sediment bowl is not catching everything. And then the bolts that bolt from the frame up to the block, I still have to install. And I did put those wheelie bars on it to pull. I made those wheelie bars.